coming to you from sunny-ish California is our guest today, which is Simon Lincoln Reeder. He's offered to give us insights into what it is like to be back in the US, because Simon divides his time between London and the US. He's a fund manager, trustee of an educational charity, and media correspondent. He did Business Day, he's been on Business News, and now he's ours, daily friend. Simon, spending time on both sides of the Atlantic gives you access to insights perhaps that are fresher and closer and, dare I say, sometimes a bit weirder than we might get reading and seeing it from afar. Having not been there during the election of that saw Donald Trump elected as the forthcoming president, what was your impression of the mood in America getting back to America in the last few weeks?
I think it's optimistic. It certainly feels that there's a sense of relief in having avoided a continuation of the Biden-Handler administration, and I think that deserves some examination, because what do you mean by the Biden-Handler administration? Just before I arrived back here, the Wall Street Journal undertook this expose as to exactly what role Joe Biden had been playing for the last 4 years, and exactly how his condition had been covered up by staffers. And the net result of that is very clear in that America actually hasn't had a president for the last 4 years, and that policy and statements have been driven by a set of his close associates, including his chief of staff, Ron Klain, but they extend to the State Department and so on. So basically, and this is something that I predicted in 2020, having heard it first from the Canadian commentator Mark Stein, in that this is a remote control government. America has essentially had a remote control government for the last 4 years. You saw this in the lead up to 2020's elections, where Joe Biden made very few public appearances, wasn't prepared to answer any questions, and getting back to where we are now, that relief has mutated, well, rather graduated into optimism. And I think that's a very strong national interest when parents are telling their children, and teachers are telling their kids, and small business owners are telling their customers and suppliers that the country's best days lie ahead of it. You're forming a really strong national interest. Now, I think in terms of what awaits Trump with that sort of optimism, it's very difficult to immediately change the prices that have led to this, the inflation that has led to this cost of living crisis. All he can really do is alter the foundations by untapping these large deposits of natural gas, and hopefully along the beneficiary chain that will see household, that'll see an impact on the bottom line of households. But there are other reasons why people are relieved, people are excited, and a lot of them relate to expression and not worrying that you're being monitored, you're being surveilled, and that you haven't the opportunity to speak your mind. So I think, it's pretty excited here.
One gets the impression that Trump has learned something from both being in office for 4 years and then being out of office for 4 years, and whatever he's done or whatever negatives people are exposed to about him, and he's not unfoundedly, there's a feeling that there's structure, that he's been much more prepared for for setting up an administration. Some of his choices may be a little odd and one may not agree with, but for example, certainly appointing Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to look at slicing red tape in legislation, it gives a sense one has a sense that there is purpose there, and also the utterances, some of the utterances he's made on the foreign policy stage are given a sense of firmness, unlike that sort of wavering support, non-support, support, non-support that you saw with the Biden administration on Ukraine and Israel. Isn't that perhaps partly what creates the sense of positive, is that somebody is actually prepared to take responsibility?
Without question. And, getting back to your previous question, in a Harris-Walz administration would have simply been a continuation of the old, and that would have impacted on foreign policy. There's a lot of work to do. And, I sit here 2 days after this terrorist attack in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, where this chap drove a Ford truck into a crowd, killing 15 revelers, wounding 35 others. And if you look at the response as to how it's happened, the first thing that the FBI did was to claim that there was no terrorism involved, and people are sitting there going, this is absolute rubbish. There was a black ISIS flag on that truck, and she can't continue this FBI DEI hire who was wheeled out to explain this. She can't continue that. But I strongly believe that in the event Kamala Harris had won, that would have been the prevailing logic, and people would have had to accept this, and the subsequent threats that Joe Biden made on the steps of Air Force One, which is almost a carbon copy of how the English deal with crises. And I think the response is indicative of people going, no, actually, this is the wrong way to do it. We've got a real lack of trust in our institutions. This is nonsense. And what Donald Trump and his cabinet picks present is a much more honest, you could call it robust. I think that there is a real future here for the type of truth-telling in incidents such as these, that makes people feel safer.
Well, it sort of harks back to the fact that the Biden administration seems to be on messaging a lot of this stuff very patronizing or paternalistic towards people, sort of assuming that if they come out with a statement before they know anything, that it isn't an act of terrorism, when the modus operandi certainly suggests to people who watch, keep up with the news, given the fact that the media literally lied, a lot of the legacy media lied about his health, his condition. People feel offended that they, that they are potentially being lied to, because whatever opinions the public may face, they're entitled to at least an opinion that it may have been, given the circumstances, a terrorist attack. Has the legacy media, that one doesn't get the impression, but has the legacy media sort of exonerated itself in any way for what is essentially shameless disinformation in the last few years?
This is a very interesting point, because I've been speaking to the owner of the Los Angeles Times, Patrick Soon-Shiong, and he's a pretty remarkable guy. Yeah. And he spent his first 18, I think he left South Africa when he was 19 or 20, having worked in Johannesburg, but he grew up in the Eastern Cape. And in 2018, he purchased the Los Angeles Times for $500 million, plus another $100 million in pension obligations. Do you think that he could get $300 million for that newspaper now? It's the biggest newspaper on the West Coast. I'm not sure that he could. And, likewise, Mark Benioff, who's the founder of Salesforce, he's not a remarkable man. He's one of these woke billionaires. He bought Time magazine for $190 million, and just before the elections, he was in discussions with a Greek consortium to sell for between 70 and 90 million. So without the public opinion shaping, there's the threat of the commercial collapse to these prestige media institutions. I think the two are inextricably linked, but the fact is that they're under pressure commercially, and they're under pressure for trust, and that hasn't been that's been intensified by Donald Trump remarking that he will invite podcasters into his news briefings. He will invite alternative media sources, and Joe Rogan, House and Habit, and all of these highly influential startups, if you want, from the last few years. And I don't quite know how the prestige media are going to accommodate this. Patrick's got this idea that he's going to have a bias meter on the Los Angeles Times website. He's also committed to trashing his existing editorial board and replacing it with new profiles. But, Sara, let's look at how does the prestige media in America redeem itself in taking the model of Patrick's new strategy at the Los Angeles Times. He wants to constitute a new editorial board. If there is one person on that board who has ever suggested it's a good idea that someone be censored for their views, no. Okay, if there's one person on that board who's ever suggested that it's a good idea for someone to be debanked, to lose access to financial services, then no. And that's got to be the theme if it wants to enjoy a sense of renewal. But I don't think that's possible. I think that these guys are going to slowly decay. The New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Daily Beast, the other rubbish like that. It's an almost impossible task. As I said, you've got the commercials, and then you've got to deal with this really, really poor public perception.
No, I think I remember when after Barry Weiss left the New York Times, and she sort of said, well, despite the misinformation that is apparent in some of the work they've done and how and ultimately led to her going, it's still a very good newspaper and they do some very good stuff. The problem is that as soon as worthy titles have been called out very, very, very clearly to have misrepresented the facts, automatically your trust in a media outlet will go, whether it's legacy or whether it's social media, podcasting, etc., etc. So I think you're seeing it to a lot of extent. I do watch a lot of political related podcasts, and people's reputations are growing and building because they are giving people the sense that they do their homework. You may not share their views, but that if some mistake is made, an apology will be given. And I think there's a sense of there's an arrogance that comes with the status that is going to partly contribute to the demise of these institutions.
Absolutely,
sort of hubris.
Without question, and I think that's censorship in America is conspired, has been conspired by two quarters, and the first is the media itself. And the second is the states through collaboration with dark money NGOs and tech. And I think that you could separate them, and we could explore the latter comprehensively, because that's been really quite interesting to watch that up close in the last few weeks and see a lot of scrambling there. But the media, you asked the question, how does it? You previously asked the question, how does it rebuild? How do you get the sort of numbers that you're seeing? That Jessica Reed Krause at House and Habit is getting, that Joe Rogan is getting, that Sean Ryan. If you look at the top US podcasts, in the top 10, I think you could safely say that at least 5 are considerably right leaning. I just don't see a way for these institutions that have now. You see, the problem is that the likes of the New York Times, the likes of the LA Times, and other American newspapers, USA Today, ABC, and so on, a lot of them have been accused of relaying or marshalling information that comes from the state. So it's the state perpetuates a message through these institutions, and these guys are just simply the carriers. And that I think deserves a lot of examination and analysis, and how that's happened. And that will be one of the most interesting aspects of the incoming Trump presidency to study. Yeah, I think that's really something to watch, whether his cabinet picks, as you alluded to earlier, are able to stem that sort of information flow to identify who's doing it, and then to put a stop to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, that raises the subject of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Not the fact that sort of I set him aside on the fact that he's idiosyncratic, a sort of slightly crazy genius, is the fact that, like many in the billionaire class, he was a Democrat. And the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, the one in Pennsylvania, really switched him. And I think he strikes me as the sort of guy who will not necessarily have the right views on things, but if he's seen something and realized that he's been following the wrong path, he changes. And when he changes, he commits. I mean, obviously his detractors think he's, Satan incarnate, but he's partly a reflection of the fact that I get the impression that much of the class of Democrat, there is a fair number of the Democratic Party support base that is kind of literally relieved that Kamala Harris failed. I know they've spoken about her one day, trying again perhaps, but my impression is that that's it. She's not going to come back. They're going to be much better people in the future.
Yeah, look, Musk is having very successfully delivered Trump to the White House, especially amongst the younger voters who find him very, very influential, and they are inspired by his work at Tesla and SpaceX and so on. Musk has in the last couple of days seized an issue in the United Kingdom that I don't know if you've been following his coverage of these so-called grooming gangs in the north of England and Keir Starmer's role in this. I'd be terrified if I think that the Labour government in the UK are pretty terrified about this. There are many parts to this, and this is a story that I've been studying since 2014, when a report was dropped, the Alexis J report into grooming gangs, and that grooming gangs, as I've just said, is a gentleman's way of describing Pakistani Muslim systematic rape gangs, and who have since the early 2000s shredded the spine of England, towns up and down the northern England that were formerly industrial heartlands abandoned, and then home to waves of mainly Pakistani Muslim immigrants. And this is it's not new, but the extent to which Elon Musk has enhanced scrutiny of this is extraordinary. You have one guy who's got this platform in which free speech is tolerated. I won't say, if you go against him, he's sometimes a little bit prickly, but for the most part, it's the most reliable platform in the event you wish to have your mind expressed. But Sara, this is it's a very serious thing, and I see the impact of this playing upon UK politics now. The next thing I predict with Elon Musk's intensified study of this is that Labour politicians are going to start going, no, this guy's a threat to us. We feel physically threatened by this level of scrutiny, and something must be done. It's something that I encourage everyone to pay very close attention to. But it shows exactly the level of influence that he has.
Well, I believe he's touted to become the world's first dollar trillionaire, and I suppose proof of that to some extent is proof of the fact that governments there's a limit to their power, and money is to some extent will express that limit. What is just generally your sense of sort of how the different minority groupings in America, I mean, how they've changed they changed their voting patterns. Very many more Latino men and even black men, particularly, shifted to voting for Donald Trump. People, I guess, were a bit surprised that there hasn't been a greater shift amongst the Jewish community away from the Democrats, particularly because of what has been happening on US campuses with regard to the promotion of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic views. But again, with regard to the last, Donald Trump came out very soon after his election and said he will not tolerate this anti-Semitism, and that for me is particularly, I mean, it's both in Europe as well, but particularly in America has been completely lacking. You've tended to have this comment of, oh gosh, this is unacceptable, but there's no sense that the administration was ever going to take a properly principled position on issues that affect people. And Kamala Harris's sort of appeal to black men was just so patronizing. And, it was beyond belief. And I'm wondering if you're just getting a sense that whether there is a sense that people are really feeling like he's got their backs, or he'll give them the space to be who they are and what they need.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was discussing this yesterday with a friend of mine. And if you look at the shift in black voting patterns, and to your point of Kamala Harris being patronizing, I mean, I think patronizing is the least of her crimes towards young black men. When she was the district attorney in California, she locked young black men up for possession of marijuana. Excuse me. And thereafter, she admitted to having abused it herself. She was the continuation of Joe Biden's 2020 black men pandering. And, the Democrat Party, if you remember, in 2020, there was that, I don't know what you want to call this extraordinary theater of Nancy Pelosi along with Chuck Schumer, all of these senior Democrats kneeling in honor of George Floyd, wearing kente cloth scarves, okay, which is just, it's hysterical. And that goes a lot to show that they've taken this vote for granted. This minority group, they've taken it for granted. If you want to go onto YouTube, any of the listeners ever go on to watch a Chicago interface with the mayor there, who's a Democrat, and see how absolutely disgusted black individuals in the communities around Chicago are with the way that they're being treated, their lack of, they have no access to public resources in the way that migrants are afforded them. I watched one black woman tearing strips off the mayor. I think his name is Brandon Lewis in Chicago. And I got the sense that she spoke for huge numbers of black voters in America who live in poorer states and don't have the upward mobility that they feel that they deserve in a country as rich as America. That absolutely has played a part. But you see, what that does, Sara, is that intensifies pressure onto Donald Trump. And how do you rein in? And he's got a couple of measures which I'm really interested in watching, and I think everyone should be. And the first, as I mentioned earlier, was to alter the foundations of the economy by drilling for gas, and that sort of reflection at the petrol pumps, eventually impacting household bottom lines. but then how do you sort of bring aspiration back to communities that have been ignored by the people who said that they spoke for them? And you know, I got to tell you that in the same way that I felt that it was more comfortable living under a black nationalist in Jacob Zuma than under a white liberal in Keir Starmer, black people in America will feel the converse. They'd rather live under someone who they think has a chance of improving their circumstances and prospects than one of these white liberals like Joe Biden and his handlers, whoever would be controlling whatever comes out of Kamala Harris's mouth, because it's change, and maybe there's a chance that there's, you know, that their salaries will increase. Maybe there's a chance that there'll be more jobs available, and that the people that are swamping the resources, namely the migrants, won't be there anymore. It remains to be seen, but I think that's the voting logic of those communities who voted for Donald Trump this time.
Well, essentially, it was a classic. It's the economy stupid type election. It was about the fundamental issues that affect people and how they perceive. It didn't help for Kamala Harris or Joe Biden to sort of understand how people felt about the fact that inflation was coming down. It's the day-to-day effect of its everyday life that people are responding to. And one got the impression, it was fascinating, that despite having 3 times the amount of money behind her in the campaign, Donald Trump picked that up well. He also read social media well, and he targeted a variety of issues, but the issues that people care about and are affected by. And he targeted their common sense dismay with DEI, with wokeness, for want of a better expression. And again, it was just the kind of common sense logic of it. I mean, what was fascinating is one of the groups that doesn't poll, they keep an eye on social media, for example, with young people. They said the reason that so many more young people had voted for him, they could pick it up from social media, because youngsters were going on saying, we might actually be able to get jobs under the sky. We might actually be able to cut our university loan debt under the sky. Yeah. He's got people like Musk and Ramaswamy. They are people who've made money, who've made successes, happen both not to be American born. And the Democratic program was just, I don't know, it was out there somewhere. It just really didn't deal with the realities. And are they getting the sense? Are they truly? I know some pundits for the Democrats are sort of realizing kind of what happened, but one doesn't get the sense that Democrats really understand that at the end of the day, you've just got to listen to what people are saying to understand what they need from you as their representatives.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. You know, young people are expected to be Kamala Harris voters. Now, here in Orange County is a very interesting story, because in 2016, just when I met my wife, this county in California voted for Hillary Clinton. In 2020, and I was always told, my wife she told me that this was a Ronald Reagan, sort of this Reagan republicanism. But in 2020, Orange County voted for Joe Biden. And I know it's California and so on, but I found these results in which the county was overwhelmingly Trump, really refreshing, and that's because this Orange County it's your suburban wine mob, okay? And suburban wine moms are bad by themselves, but then they have suburban wine mom children, okay? And these are the sorts of kids that you find, they'll be sitting on sofas playing with their phones, and they see some atrocity committed in the Donbass in Ukraine, and they'll type into social media, please don't fight, it makes me sad, and then go on to do whatever else that they do. But the change that happened here, and Trump won over this suburban wine mom crowd, was quite astonishing. And I see that to your point about DEI, and the expectation that kids would be natural Kamala Harris because of what they're taught by bent professors in university, because of the opportunism that corporates use to take these themes of identity and race into their marketing. And you'd expect them to be there, but they weren't. And I think the opposite has happened, that the kids that have been watching this Democrat debacle unfold for the past 4 years, and this heightened, aggressive pursuit of DEI has frightened them, because it's an unfamiliar feeling. You know, you even suburban wine mom kids, okay, even they know that you shouldn't be having some dude who's got a sewing course behind him drilling holes into the engine of a Boeing 737 engine. And I think that, you know, this DEI thing has gone so out of control. I mean, we've got 4.5 years of it left in the UK, but I think one of the you know, certainly by his cabinet picks, and the strength of feeling in certain members of Congress, that the DEI is going to be gutted wherever it is located, wherever it is encountered, and that'll be a great thing, because it just doesn't make sense. And, you know, people say to me that South Africa was the original case of that, and you know, that there are nuances which you could slightly counter, but the sense that that anti-meritocratic forces should occupy important positions in public life, in corporate life, I think is going to be really challenged in the next 4 years.
Just to under something sort of related but different, and that is that in the UK, the release of the Cass report into transgender medicine, detrimentally affecting children, teenagers, has had an extraordinary effect on diminishing the hysteria of the transgender movement, and sometimes sheer thuggery. What's the situation like in the States with regard to approaches, views on the arguments for and against the whole transgender cause, particularly the extent to which it affects children? Is it having a similar effect in America, or is America still very much, there are factions? Because I know a fair amount of the scientific community has sort of gone over to the woke side and abandoned a lot of science in this milieu. And I just wondered whether there was any sense that things were changing there too.
You know, it's very interesting. I think that this is captured in one example. If you recall an individual called Rachel Levine, okay? So basically, Rachel, before it was Rachel, it was Richard, and Richard used to go on holiday with his family wearing, you know, the American chinos with 5 pleats on each side and big white New Balance tackies, and then decided to become a woman. Okay, and this guy, this individual has been replaced by RFK Jr. in the prospective Trump cabinet, and that for me is indication enough that, you know, real science is going to be followed in the next 4 years in what RFK does. As it relates to the transgender argument, America is going to quickly find out that there are other forces that occupy the mind of someone who is uncertain as to their gender. And you'll see this in the next few years, what the UK did. And the UK sort of blazed the trail as it relates to self-identity, and it's created generations of turmoil by just simply allowing people to change sex as and when they wanted. Um, during that same time, even during the the Biden administration, you saw the kind of resistance that's absent in the UK. The UK does things, it publishes reports and then it constitutes commissions of inquiry, and then they say, no, we should publish a report, and then that report says, no, you must constitute a commission of inquiry. So it goes on. But if you look at what was happening, especially at schools, and this information you can locate on YouTube if it's up there. You see parents in aggressive resistance to schools that were pursuing these policies that are evident in the UK, and the UK might have Hillary Cass may have published this report condemning the care and so on. But Labour have already suggested that they're going to dismiss it. In fact, the LGBTQ quarter of Labour have written to the government, have written to Keir Starmer, indicating that they do not support it and it should not be considered. And that's quite a powerful, that organ of government has massive influence because it's attached to Stonewall, it's attached to Mermaids, its media partner is Pink Times. I think the US is you're going to see a lot less of it. You're going to see a lot more research into the causes of it. You're going to see a lot more options as it relates to treatment programs in the next 4 years. But I'm afraid in the UK, that I don't see the same response. I think that they're going to continue occupying themselves with these. It's bizarre. Keir Starmer on a number of occasions, members of his government, the highest ranking profiles within the UK government, David Lammy, Angela Rayner, Yvette Cooper, and Keir Starmer have all gone on record to say that they don't know what a woman is. Basically, they said, what is a woman? And then they come up with this mealy-mouthed, well, I think that it's so on and so on. I don't think it's correct that you can call him a man. And it's, and if they want to continue that, then that's absolutely fine. But you'll have guys like RFK and his team on the issue here. And I've got a strong feeling that if sense is located, it will be from this country.
Well, I think the one thing that a lot of people were impressed by was Trump's appointment of Professor Jay Bhattacharya as the
Wonderful.
National Institute's leading fellow. I mean, he fought for and called for correct information about COVID. He criticized the orthodoxy and suffered the sort of cancellation that goes exactly with that ethos. So it really is a sense of almost a kind of redemptive action, because for people who take their science seriously, his reputation was not dimmed.
Without question. He presents, I think, one of the most important parts of history. He, alongside Martin Kulldorff and Sunetra Gupta, who are the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration of 2020, which, as you said, led to his cancellation chiefly via academia, his colleagues, and the administration at the time, along with the UK, led a process of character assassination against him. He, for a time, occupied a position on Nick Hudson's Panda, but that too was subjected to this terrible onslaught led out of the UK. And him coming back, he's a remarkably talented, competent individual. If you've got profiles such as those in a government, it's very reassuring to have that level of objective, specific expertise instead of people like Jeremy Farrar in the UK. And Jeremy Farrar was of course involved in the character assassination of Jay Bhattacharya. Fauci, Peter Daszak, Ralph Barrack, all of these characters who who covered up that idea that this jumped from the lab, which is probably the most responsible hypothesis. But Jeremy Farrar is hysterical because when it got too hot for him, he jumped ship in the UK. He was demanding another lockdown, and the government refused to do so. So he resigned in disgust, hoping that there would be this public outcry of support. He went back to his job as the director of the Wellcome Trust, which is one of the largest charitable trusts in the world. And the first thing that he did when he got back there was to launch an inquiry of racism in the institution, of which he subsequently found his own institution guilty of racism, which begs the question, why do people give something that's racist money? But you've got those guys, and then you've got people like Jay Bhattacharya, like RFK coming into the US administration. And that's the sort of thing, Sara, that goes back to my point earlier about breeding optimism and the feeling that the country's best days lie ahead of it.
Just sort of the last question on my side is foreign policy. Certainly one has the impression that no one's entirely sure what he will actually do come the circumstances, but he's sent out 2 warnings to Hamas to come to the table and to resolve the conflict. He's already had his representative, former army veteran Keith Kellogg, going to the Ukraine. He's not in office yet, and he's already gone to the Ukraine and to Russia to start talking. But certainly the sense I get, the general response in a country like Israel was the sense that they felt that here was somebody who would make a difference to to bringing this war to an end for the right reasons.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, let's look at what we in terms of what we've discussed. There are 3 expectations that people who voted for Donald Trump largely had, and the first was to see an impact onto the cost of living crisis here, and the second, as we also discussed, was to completely gut the anti-meritocratic DEI forces wherever they are encountered. And then the third dividend, call it a dividend, is for the rest of us too. I think that we, in the larger world, those who align with the West, are also afforded something from this election too, and that would be the location of peace certainly in Ukraine, and then for the Israeli hostage situation to be resolved. And I think that those are really important features, and you could look at why the Democrat administration doesn't want that. You could also look at why certain Republican profiles are happy to keep throwing money at Ukraine and want to see more conflict in the Middle East. But, go back to Trump's coalition, which was really quite strange and only sort of shaped up in the final weeks prior to the election, where you had Muslims from Dearborn in Michigan, which is a strong community there, who said that we are voting for Donald Trump because there is the prospect of peace, unlike the current administration, the Biden administration, where we can't see it happening. But then you also had Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn, in New York, voting for the same thing. They want to see this over.
Which is quite ironic.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's it will be firmly on top of this agenda. Trump is he's bombastic and unpredictable, but he sees that prosperity is only accessible when the foundations are peaceful, when people aren't fighting with each other, and they've got more time and more energy to dedicate to commercial aspiration, and that's the foundations that he wants to run here. And I think that as any sort of platform goes, that's really compelling, and it incentivizes him to find peace in these places of conflict.
Yeah, huge irony given the fact that Kamala virtually based her campaign on what she thought
Yeah.
the population of cities like Dearborn and nearby cities thought and felt, and again, misread. But Simon, I think we're going to look at 4 fascinating years, particularly this year of 2025. It's going to really see to what extent upending the apple cart achieves success, the success people are looking for, and the difference. So thank you very much for your insights, and we'll follow them as things go.
Terrific. Great to see you, Sara. Thank you for having me.